Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the Science and Faith podcast brought to you by the Dortmund Center for Science and Faith. I am your host, Mario Russo. So glad that you guys tuned in. So glad that you're here. I am so excited. This is our very first episode. We're launching it today, and we are just thrilled that you're here with us, and we hope that you will be staying with us over the coming days and weeks and months as we release a new episode every single week. If there's a question that you guys have, or you want to get in touch with us or talk about other themes or make a suggestion about a future topic for the show, please email us. The email address is scienceandfaithdortmund@gmail.com. That's Science and Faith Dortmund, DORTMUND @gmail.com, and we'll do our best to respond to those. And who knows, if you've got a really great question or a really great topic suggestion, we may feature it on a future episode of the podcast. So thanks so much for being here, and let's go ahead and get started. I thought I would begin today by talking a little bit about my story. So why science and faith, and why am I doing this? Why are we doing this together? Why do we have a podcast? And what has brought me to this place? What does my journey look like? What's my story all about? So I guess you could say that my story really begins like many other stories. I was raised in a conservative Christian family, and I was taught the Bible from a young age. And I believed the Bible as a young person. I believed in a very strict literal interpretation of the creation story in Genesis 1 to 11. And that's kind of where my worldview came out of. And so as I grew up, I started to have questions myself, and I searched for answers. But I was also particularly interested in finding answers that I could give to other people, extended family members, friends, acquaintances, people who had questions about the Bible that were either very similar to mine or even deeper than mine, my own questions. And I desperately wanted to have answers to give them. And so my life really changed when I was about 16 years old. Answers in Genesis came to town, to the city where I was living, and Ken Ham did a seminar, and it completely rocked my world. I loved every single minute that I was there when I attended the seminar. It was fantastic. For the first time in my life, I had good, well thought out arguments and answers to a lot of objections and a lot of questions that people had about the Genesis story and creation and the Bible and all of that. So I loved it, and it was fantastic. And I found myself very quickly becoming passionate about creation apologetics and using it as a means of evangelism and all kinds of stuff like that. So as a young person, this was perfect for me. I got my hands on as many resources, young earth creationism and Answers in Genesis resources as I could, and I read. I would take yearly trips with some of my siblings to Answers in Genesis in Kentucky, and we would stay for a couple weeks, and we would volunteer, helping out in whatever ways that we could. And it was a fantastic time. I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it. But eventually, I grew up, and I attended university, and so I had this idea that one of the sort of my role to play in the big scheme of things was that I was going to be a high school biology teacher, and I was going to quietly, secretly teach young earth creationism in the public school systems to my high school students. I would challenge the evolutionary biology that was being taught. Now, in order to do that, I had to have a bachelor's degree in teaching to do that. But I wanted a bachelor's degree in biology be from not a Christian university, because I didn't want anyone to be able to say, oh, well, he's got his bachelor's degree in biology from a Christian university, and that doesn't mean anything. So I went to a public university, University of South Carolina, and I ended up with an interdisciplinary Bachelor of Science degree in biology and psychology. And I think at first my parents were concerned that I would get through the program and graduate, and somehow my secular professors would change my mind about evolution. And actually the opposite happened. I graduated from college with my bachelor's in science in biology and psychology, and I was more convinced than ever of the young earth creationist position. And so I was ready to go. I wanted to go in teaching and get on with the mission. But I quickly learned that if you're going to be able to earn enough money to provide for your family, a bachelor's degree teaching high school science is not the ideal vocation to do that. So I started looking into graduate programs to be able to kind of give me an advantage, if you will, to teaching. And I met my wife, and we got married, and so we kind of together started to think about more seriously what was God calling us to do now as a couple and as a family eventually. And so I didn't pursue a master's in biology or teaching. Instead, I went to seminary, and I started to feel more called to ministry, and to more specifically to pastoral ministry. And so I started in seminary in 2009, and it was there that I learned the basic tools of what we call hermeneutics and exegesis. That is, how do you look at a passage in the Bible and determine, who wrote this, who is he writing this to, what was the audience, why was he writing this, what does this mean, what would this have meant in the original context of not only the letter, but the historical context of the people that were receiving this letter. And it just opened up to me a whole new world of meaning for the Bible. So now, armed with these new tools, I set to work going back and reevaluating my views on Genesis and the creation story, and were they really 6 literal 24-hour days? Was all of creation created? Was the whole universe created 6,000 to 10,000 years ago? All of that, and was Adam a historical person, for example? And what I came to the conclusion of was that while the young Earth creationist position was a legitimate view, it was not the only legitimate view on the opening chapters of Genesis, from a biblical exegesis and hermeneutical interpretation standpoint. That there were other views out there as well that could also be seen as legitimate and true. So I set about evaluating those, the day-age theory, gap theory, old age, and theistic, what at the time was called theistic evolution, and so which is now called evolutionary creationism. And so what I realized was that all of these views were in some form or another legitimate views that a Christian could hold and still be a Christian, and they were consistent with an interpretation of Genesis 1 and 2, even chapter 3. So that was all very, very important for me. Once I got to that place, I started kind of individually analyzing these different views, and I found that the view that made the most sense to me, used from a biblical interpretation standpoint, was the evolutionary creation position. What I needed to do was I needed to kind of evaluate now whether or not evolutionary science was actually truthful on the basis of the scientific evidence. And already having a bachelor's degree in biology, it didn't take me very long to kind of go through and reevaluate the evidence, the scientific evidence for biological evolution, and realize there was a really strong case scientifically for evolution. So now the question in my mind was, okay, can evolutionary biology be compatible with the opening chapters in Genesis? And according to my exegesis and hermeneutics, the Bible was, specifically Genesis 1 to 11, was compatible with evolutionary theory. Now, if you're at this point wondering how in the world can this guy think that evolutionary biology is compatible with the creation story in Genesis, we're going to get to that. We're going to have a future episode on the compatibility between those two things. So stay tuned. That's going to happen. So now that I am holding to this position of the compatibility between the creation story in Genesis and evolution, the question in my mind is, okay, where do I go from here? What do I do? And so for me, I started to think about, because here I am now in my late 20s. I've gotten through seminary and I have a family, and I'm not the same person I was when I was a young adult and when I was a teenager. So what do I do now that I've completely changed my position and am now pretty squarely in the evolutionary creationism camp, so to speak. And so I started to think about, well, if I could go back and talk to the 16-year-old me, if I could go back and talk to the 19-year-old me and the 22-year-old me, what would I say? And how would I talk to them? And what I realized was that was kind of what I wanted to do, was not just go back and talk to the 16-year-old me and the 19 and 22-year-old me, but that I wanted to talk to other people who were kind of in that same stage of life and who are on a similar journey. People who were exploring their faith, needing answers to questions that they have or questions that they were getting from other people. And learning how to explain things in a way that would make sense and be at the same time beautiful and compelling and life-changing and make people fall deeper in love with Jesus, and show how God's use of evolution to create is a magnificent, beautiful thing. And so that's really the motivation here behind all of this. It's not to prove that evolution is true and that creationism is false. It's not to disprove the Bible. Quite the opposite, actually. It's to show the compatibility between evolutionary biology and the Bible. But it's also about, how do we read the Bible correctly? How do we read the Bible in a way that we don't have to exclude every other position and believe somehow that other positions are selling out or making excuses for evolution, but rather just seeing the two as intertwined and connected and just a fuller, richer, better, more beautiful picture of God and who he is and his character and his nature by accepting both the evolutionary science and the truthfulness of the Bible and the creation story. So that's my story. That's where I'm coming from. And it's been a crazy journey, but I've enjoyed every single minute of it. And so what we want to do through this podcast is we want to make resources available. We want to have conversations. We want to have discussions about difficult questions. But we also want to provide some answers and some perspectives. And we don't want to always provide, this is the right answer, this is the correct way of thinking. We want to sometimes it's just important to say, we don't know. Or, there's a couple of different possibilities here. And here are the different possibilities. And you have to choose. You have to pick one. And one may be the right answer, or these all may be right. Or none of them may be right. We may be looking at something where we haven't even figured this out yet. But we want to create possibilities for people to kind of look at evolutionary science and look at biblical theology and see them as helping each other, not at war with each other, not in conflict with each other, not in a race to see who's going to win out. There's not this culture war between Christianity and science or between the Bible and evolutionary theory. It's not that dramatic. It can be, I think if we tone down the drama, we can actually start to see some beauty emerge. And that's my goal, that's my plan. And that's my story. And that's why I do what I do. And that's why we're here doing this together. And then hopefully, as we move forward and we tackle some of the questions that you guys have, we can uncover some beautiful truths together. And I'm looking forward to the journey. And I certainly hope that you are too. So that's our first episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been a joy, and it's been a privilege to be here with you. If you have a question or a comment, you can leave it below in the comment section below. Or if you want, send us an email, scienceandfaithdortmund@gmail.com. And I look forward to interacting with you guys over the coming weeks and months. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to it. Hope you're looking forward to it too. So have a great day, and we'll see you next week for our next episode. Thanks so much.